On a calm Wednesday morning, as the sun began to warm the storefronts of Main Street, Colonel Arthur Evans, an 82-year-old gentleman with a calm, measured stride, found himself at the familiar doors of Patriot Trust Bank. He wasn't there for accolades or grand ceremonies, though his life certainly earned them. No, Colonel Evans, a proud veteran of the Korean and Vietnam conflicts, was simply performing a quiet act of love. He needed to withdraw a modest sum from an old account he hadn't touched in nearly 5 decades. Money saved from the very hazard pay earned during those demanding deployments defending our freedoms. He stepped inside, hat in hand, a simple black cap adorned with a faded patch reading, "Korea, Vietnam Veteran." His shirt was neatly pressed, though the cuffs showed honest wear, hinting at a life well lived and purposeful. Tucked carefully in his coat pocket were his veteran identification card and a challenge coin. Smooth and comforting from years of quiet companionship, he patiently joined the line, much like countless other mornings in a life marked by patience and discipline. Colonel Evans wasn't one to make a fuss or draw attention. His generation understood the quiet dignity of waiting your turn. His hands, though slightly trembling from the passage of time and echoes of cold nights spent in nameless places, held his identification with steady resolve. All he wanted was to complete this simple errand, an act of selfless support for his grandson's college education. He simply sought to fulfill a promise, a commitment that resonated far deeper than any bank transaction, and indeed more profound than the public recognition he never sought. It was a routine visit he'd made many times in his long life. But this day would turn out to be anything but ordinary, challenging the quiet respect he carried with every step. A subtle shift in the atmosphere began as Colonel Arthur Evans patiently reached the counter at Patriot Trust Bank. The young teller, no older than 25, blinked at the name on his account and the associated dates. Her brow furrowed, a clear sign of uncertainty. Colonel Evans, ever polite, offered his identification. His hand held the ID steady, bearing the faint tremor of years spent in cold, nameless places. "I'm just trying to pull some funds," he said softly, his voice calm. "This account's under Arthur Evans. It's been a while, I know." The teller managed a tight, uneasy smile, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. Then she paused, a flicker of panic crossing her face as her screen didn't align with youthful expectations. She nervously signaled her manager. Kyle, a man in his late 30s, approached with a slick haircut and an arrogant posture. He took Colonel Evans's documents, glanced at the older gentleman, and let out a chuckle that was anything but friendly. "You sure this account is yours, sir?" he drawled, twisting the word into an insult. "This discharge form, it looks like it was typed on a dinosaur." The young teller nervously tittered, echoing her manager's disrespect. Colonel Evans, however, said nothing. He simply reached into his coat pocket with slow, deliberate fingers. He placed something on the counter, a brass challenge coin, beautifully engraved with a thunderbird and a cluster of stars, a symbol known only to those who had truly served. But Kyle didn't even glance at it. "Cute trinket," he muttered, waving a dismissive hand. "Anyone can buy those online these days." He then turned to the bank's security guard, motioning toward the front doors. "We've got another wannabe vet trying to game the system here. Escort him out, please." The guard hesitated just a second. That brief pause allowed Colonel Evans to hear every cutting word, and for hushed conversations across the bank lobby to cease. A few younger customers chuckled, eyes glued to their phones, while others quickly looked away, pretending not to hear. Colonel Evans didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice, demand respect, or show anger. He simply picked up his cherished coin, slid it back into his coat pocket, gave a dignified nod, and slowly walked towards a bench by the large front window. He sat upright, hands folded calmly, his gaze fixed on nothing outside. The snickers slowly died down, replaced by a strange, heavy silence that settled over the bank lobby. It wasn't quite guilt yet, but something colder, a palpable discomfort. Deep down, even those who had laughed weren't entirely sure. A man in a pressed uniform, carrying himself with such quiet resolve, being dismissed so callously, it was profoundly unsettling. He sat, a silent sentinel, embodying a patience forged by decades of selfless service. That challenge coin, a symbol of profound sacrifice, remained tucked away, Its immense value as invisible to these people as the very service it represented. The silence around him deepened. It was no longer dismissal, it was growing doubt. No one spoke, only the quiet buzz of fluorescent lights. A customer near the coffee station awkwardly left without making his deposit. The security guard shifted nervously, casting uneasy sideways glances at the old man. Colonel Evans had made no fuss, raised his voice once, or looked angry, yet he radiated a presence that profoundly unsettled those accustomed to casual authority. This quiet dignity, far from weakness, was the hardened patience of a man who had seen and endured far worse. This silent defiance would turn the tide in a way no one expected. The uncomfortable silence over Patriot Trust Bank was palpable, starkly contrasting with the usual cheerful hum. Most patrons kept their eyes down, pretending not to notice Colonel Arthur Evans sitting ramrod straight on the bench. A silent monument to the injustice he had just endured. But not everyone was so quick to look away. Across the lobby, Eleanor Riley, in her late 20s, watched intently, a former Air Force logistics specialist now working in defense contracting. Eleanor possessed an eye for detail and an instinct for integrity. She had caught a glimpse of the brass coin Colonel Evans had briefly placed on the counter. She'd seen a similar coin only once before, during a high-level briefing when a retired special operations colonel had laid it on a table. And every officer in the room had stood in silent reverence. That memory, sharp and vivid, now surged through her mind. Eleanor walked purposefully to the counter, her gaze locking onto Kyle. The arrogant manager. "You just made a big mistake," she stated, quiet but firm voice cutting through the uneasy air. Kyle blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" he stammered, his usual smirk faltering. Eleanor didn't raise her voice, she simply pointed toward Colonel Evans. "That man is not a fake. That coin alone outranks every paycheck in this building." Kyle snorted, attempting to regain his composure. "If he's so important, why isn't someone here with him?" Eleanor offered no reply. She simply stepped outside and made a call. She contacted a retired command officer at Fort Jefferson, who needed only to hear "Eagle Coin" and "Arthur Evans" before his tone changed completely. "You say he's there now?" the voice had asked. "Don't let him leave." Eleanor didn't know what would happen next, but her gut told her something significant was already in motion. Yet, Eleanor wasn't the only one whose conscience stirred. In the quiet back office, an older employee, George Thompson, a true lifer, with no grand title but a wealth of knowledge, had overheard the name, Arthur Evans. George paused, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he walked to a corner of the room where a brass plaque hung on the wall. It had been there since the bank opened, a dedication to the old Fort Sterling Command Base, and those who had built it. One engraved name hadn't faded, A.J. Evans. This was the same man who had overseen the original military infrastructure before the land was converted to civilian use. The profound irony of the situation settled heavily on George's mind. The man now being accused of faking his service record in the bank that existed because of his command and strategic design. Without a word, he picked up the phone and dialed a number known only by a handful of trusted individuals. "It's Eagle Coin, Patriot Trust," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He's here." Then, he hung up. Outside, Colonel Evans remained as still as stone on the bench. He didn't pull out his phone, didn't make a fuss. He watched the wind tug at the American flag across the street and waited. Not for justice or praise, but because that's what men like him have always done. They wait until they're needed. They stay even when no one believes them. They wait while the world laughs. But what no one in that bank knew, not the manager, teller, or even Eleanor, was that in mere minutes, that laughter would turn to stunned silence. Because down the road, a furious general had already slammed his phone onto a desk, donned his dress uniform, and was on his way, determined to ensure the man they dismissed, the man they called a fake, would never be overlooked again. The seeds of quiet indignation had been sown, and a mighty harvest was about to be reaped. The next 15 minutes inside Patriot Trust Bank stretched like thick molasses. Deeply uncomfortable for those who had laughed moments before. The teller kept her head low. Kyle, the arrogant manager, paced, agitated but clueless. Colonel Arthur Evans hadn't moved from his bench. a silent sentinel embodying a patience forged by decades of selfless service. His challenge coin remained tucked away, its value invisible. The silence had deepened from dismissal to palpable, uneasy doubt. Meanwhile, a sleek, black SUV cut purposefully through traffic just blocks away. Inside sat Major General Charles Dexter, decorated, respected, and famously precise, head of operations for one military district and one of only 2 men alive with high-level reconnaissance clearance. When he received the urgent call about Arthur Evans, he stopped mid-briefing, stood, and issued 4 words to his aide: "Suit up. We're leaving." Colonel Arthur Evans wasn't just a name to General Dexter, he was why General Dexter wore stars. General Dexter had trained under the doctrine Evans helped write. The thought of his revered mentor being publicly insulted ignited a fury the general rarely let show. At the bank, Kyle muttered, "He's probably hoping for a pity donation online. Veterans pull that stuff all the time." Just then, the bank's grand glass doors swung open hard. It was a command. A chill sliced through the room as the precise thud of authentic boots announced his arrival. Major General Charles Dexter walked in, full dress uniform gleaming, his presence filling the lobby. An aide followed, solemn and silent. No one moved. Noise died instantly. Kyle froze, his smirk collapsing into stunned silence. General Dexter didn't acknowledge anyone initially. His eyes locked directly onto the bench where Colonel Arthur Evans sat. Then, in front of the entire bank, the general snapped to attention and saluted. The crisp crack of palm against temple rang louder than any apology. Colonel Evans looked up, briefly confused, then slowly rose, returning the salute with profound dignity. General Dexter then turned, scanning the room. His voice, low but cutting, demanded, "Who here called Colonel Arthur Evans a fraud?" No one answered. He stepped forward. "Colonel Evans," he stated, emphasizing the rank, was instrumental in establishing joint force reconnaissance protocols still used today. His record spans 2 wars, 3 theaters, and 11 unacknowledged operations. You questioned his identity? Eyes turned to Kyle, who looked sick. I didn't know," he stammered. "His papers were old, and of course they're old." General Dexter snapped, "Because he's earned his age. He fought for this country while your biggest challenge was scheduling social media posts." The silence shifted from awkwardness to profound shame. General Dexter's aide opened a briefcase, revealing a classified folder, a commemorative coin, and a scan of the bank wall plaque with Arthur Evans's name. General Dexter placed the folder on the counter. "This bank exists because of his strategic design. That account you flagged as suspicious? It funded the original supply lines you now profit from." He then turned to Colonel Evans, his tone softening. "Sir, I'm sorry I didn't know you were in town sooner." Colonel Evans gave a tired nod. "Didn't come to be found. Just needed enough to help my grandson with school." General Dexter nodded slowly. "Then let's make that happen." And together, they stepped toward the counter. As Kyle backed away in silent, defeated surrender, the laughter was long gone. And the lesson had just begun. The silence inside Patriot Trust Bank was no longer awkward, it was reverent. Every person in that room had just witnessed something profound shift, like the ground beneath their feet remembering the immense weight it once bore. Major General Charles Dexter stood beside Colonel Arthur Evans at the counter. Not barking orders or calling for punishment, but simply standing as if nothing else mattered until this humble man received what he had come for. Colonel Evans withdrew his modest funds quietly, without ceremony, funds intended to help his grandson pay for college, a selfless purpose he hadn't even mentioned until the general had gently inquired. He didn't want attention, he never had. All he ever wanted was to keep his word to those he fought for and to those he came home to. Now visibly shaking, the young teller printed the receipt, whispering an apology that Colonel Evans didn't acknowledge, not out of spite, but because he simply didn't need it. He took the slip, folded it once with the familiar precision of a man who had organized countless maps and orders, and tucked it into his coat pocket like it was just another task efficiently completed. But as he turned to leave, General Dexter stopped him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Colonel, you've got 2 minutes, he said softly. Colonel Evans raised a brow, a flicker of mild surprise in his eyes. "For what?" General Dexter nodded toward the now silent room. For the honor you never asked for. And then, without a single word of command, something truly remarkable happened. Every military veteran stood tall and saluted. From a young reservist by the ATM to an old Navy quartermaster filling out a deposit slip. Even civilians rose from their seats. Not because they were told to, but because something profound in the air told them. This is how you honor a man like that. Colonel Evans froze for a second. Not in pride, but in a quiet, almost disbelieving recognition of the respect he had always given but rarely received. Then he slowly returned the salute with the quiet precision of decades of ingrained discipline. General Dexter reached into his coat pocket and handed Colonel Evans a small velvet box. "We've been holding this for years," he said, his voice imbued with deep respect. "Thought you'd want to have it now." Inside was a clean and polished medal engraved only with a name and 3 powerful words: "Service beyond record." Colonel Evans stared at it for a long time. No tears welled in his eyes. No grand speech formed on his lips. Just a slow, profound nod, as if he had finally closed a door no one else had known was still open. A silent acknowledgement of a chapter finally honored. Then he looked at General Dexter and said softly, his voice a low rumble, "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came to keep a promise." General Dexter nodded back, a deep understanding in his gaze. "And in doing so, Colonel, you reminded us all what true service means." Colonel Evans then walked out into the sunlight, his stride perhaps a little lighter, though no cameras followed, and no headlines immediately blared. But the people inside stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer, forever touched by the quiet dignity they had witnessed. A few days later, the bank's front entrance added a new line to the brass plaque. Beneath the original dedication, a second inscription appeared, etched in timeless bronze: Fred J. Miller, Colonel, U.S. Army, Honor and Silence. It didn't name the incident. It didn't mention the general. But everyone who worked there knew. Because some truths don't need to be shouted from the rooftops to change everything. And now, every time customers walk through those doors, they see the name of the man they almost laughed out of the building, a quiet, enduring testament to a life of profound service and a reminder that true heroes often walk among us in plain sight. My dear friends, the story of Colonel Arthur Evans reminds us of a timeless truth we often forget in our busy world. True honor doesn't always wear a flashy uniform or stand on a podium. Usually, it passes among us, in the unassuming faces of those who have given so much, expecting nothing in return. This story isn't just about a bank or a general, it's a powerful lesson about looking beyond the surface. It's about remembering that dignity, resilience, and profound sacrifice often reside in the most unexpected places. In the hands that tremble slightly. In the eyes that hold memories of battles we can only imagine. This veteran simply sought to fulfill a promise for his grandson. Yet he became a mirror. Reflecting our forgotten values, he showed us that the most extraordinary acts of courage aren't always seen on the battlefield, but sometimes in the quiet strength of enduring disrespect and the steadfastness of principles. It's a call for us all to slow down and truly see the people around us, especially our elders and veterans. To understand that respect isn't given only when earned in plain sight, but should be extended because of the unseen journeys, untold stories, and the quiet sacrifices that built our world. Let this resonate deep within your heart. What are your thoughts? Have you ever witnessed someone being overlooked or unfairly judged, only for their true character to shine through later? Share your stories and reflections in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and together, we can build a community that truly honors those who have served. And if this story touched your spirit and reminded you that some uniforms are never truly taken off, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you join us in celebrating these quiet heroes, ensuring their legacy of honor and silence continues to inspire generations. Thank you for listening.